Yeah, I remember selecting Bill Lester on one of the NASCAR games, and I didn't think about it until maybe a year or two ago. But like how representation mattered, I was like, yeah, I'm gonna race as Bill Lester. I think that's pretty cool. But I've gotten to know Bill over the last handful of years. It's been a little bit since I've talked to him, but he's a massive supporter of mine, so I appreciate him. He understands it, he gets it, and he keeps me motivated for sure.
As Matt told us earlier, trying to become the first African-American driver since Willie T. Ribbs and join Randy Bethea and the great Wendell Scott.
He did he drove the car exactly what the car wanted him to do. He got out early. It looked like a little tight, but he kept in the throttle and he got a good lap. And wow, way to go, Bill.
There you go.
Woo-hoo. That's his line.
Hey, what's up, y'all? This is former NASCAR driver Bill Lester, and you're listening to Victory Lane Vibes.
Welcome to another episode of Victory Lane Vibes. We are your hostesses with the mostesses. I'm Jared. We have Danny. We have Art. We have Carl. And we have a special guest. We told you we were going to get these interviews for Black History Month like Infinity Stones, and I think you guys are going to be really proud of this one here. So I'd like to introduce to the masses, Mr. Bill Lester. How are you doing today, sir?
Excellent. Looking forward to joining you guys, having a little bit of fun, chopping it up.
Yeah.
Absolutely. We've been looking forward to this one for a couple weeks, so we're chomping at the bit to say the least.
Let's go.
So for those of you who don't know, I guess we'll just start with who's Bill Lester, where have you been, what you've been doing, how you've been giving back to the racing community, and then I'll have Carl kick us off with the round robin questions.
The thing that I've done most recently of any significance, I would say, is wrote a motivational memoir called Winning in Reverse. And I'm sure you guys are going to ask me why the title, and I'll get to that. But I did it because I never had the desire to be an author. But on the racing scene, when I was, doing it on the regular, and I would always have sponsors to entertain because that's the lifeblood of the sport. I would have the opportunity to talk to, sponsor clients, guests, employees, that sort of thing. And they would always ask me, how did you get into NASCAR, right? Because I grew up in Northern California and I'm basically formerly a road racer, not a NASCAR, roundy round driver. So they would at 40 years of age, when I showed up on the scene, it's like, how did you get here? You came out of basically nowhere. What's that about? And so I would tell them about my story and they would all have this look, of being dumbfounded on their face with their, jaws on the ground, talking about, that's just a phenomenal story. You got to tell that story. And I'm like, because they said it's so motivational. And I'm like, oh, really? And, for me, it's not motivational because all I see is the struggle, right? I had a hard time through my career seeing the forest through the trees. It was always about the destination and not the journey. And had I done it over again, I really would have probably tried to take a little bit more time to enjoy the journey. But for me, it was all about getting to where I needed to go, which was one of the top, sports or top forms of the sport in our country. And at the time when I was younger, it was Indy cars, but NASCAR just swallowed up Indy car as far as popularity in the States was concerned. So, if I was going to commit myself to being a professional race car driver, I wanted to race on the grand stage. So that meant NASCAR. So I would tell them about, the sacrifices I made, the fact that, it's not as if I woke up one day after getting an electrical engineering, computer science degree and working in the high tech sector for 15 years, just up and quit and said, I want to be a race car driver now. No, I really wanted to be a race car driver ever since I was just shy of 8 years old when my father took me to my first race at Laguna Seca in Monterey. It was a Can-Am race. And, that's really dating myself because probably most of your viewers, or I should say listeners, don't even know what the Can-Am series is, but it was a huge, powerful series back in the day for road racing. All the heavy hitters and in sports cars were racing in Can-Am. These cars in its heyday had 1,000 horsepower and they barely weighed, 2,300 pounds. So their power to weight ratio was phenomenal. And so when I went to this race when I was real young, it just set the hook. It blew me away because I knew I liked speed. I knew I loved cars, but when my father took me to a race, that set the hook. But my parents did not come from wealth, and they did not understand motorsports. My father's got a PhD in theoretical chemistry, right? So he's very white collar. He didn't understand the racing scene. We understand stick and ball sports as a community, as a population of Black people. But, as far as racing is concerned, my father was like, what is that about? Why would you want to do that? Right? Like most people that were Black, it's like, why would you want to be out there racing cars? But that was what I wanted to do. So in any event, to make a long story short, as soon as I got this engineering degree, I went to work for Hewlett-Packard. And that's when I really started to see whether or not I was as good as I thought I was, doing all kinds of stupid stuff as soon as I got my driver's license. I was doing the Fast and the Furious, racing people on the streets before it was a movie, right? And I wasn't doing the quarter mile, or I should say even stoplight stuff. I was living in the hills of Oakland, California. And so I was doing more, going around corners sideways. It was more like drifting stuff than it was, stoplight stuff. But I wasn't really doing it from that perspective. I was doing it like from the standpoint that if the posted speed limit was 30, 40 miles an hour, I was doing 60, 70, 80 miles an hour, right? and winging it through the corners. And if I was sideways, I was sideways, right? But that's kind of racing that I was doing. So somebody said, before you kill yourself or somebody else, take it to the street. But my parents were not going to be able to be in a position to help me. That's what the engineering degree was about, because as soon as I got that piece of paper, I started to work in the high-tech sector. And I thought immediately, as soon as I got, my amateur racing license from Sports Car Club of America and got Rookie of the Year my first year, in Northern California road racing champion for my division the second year, I thought I would immediately turn professional. Well, no, that doesn't happen, especially when you don't have ways and means. You can have all sorts of, amateur titles and all that kind of stuff, but there's a big difference between going amateur and turning professional. And, it was really my first indoctrination to knowing that networking is so important, and not what you know, but who you know, people that can open doors for you and all that sort of thing. So to make a long story short, again, skipping ahead 15 years, I got married in between there. My wife said, look, hon, you're not getting any younger or any easier to live with. All your time and attention to try to make your dream come true, or say you gave it your best shot, it wasn't meant to be, and you'd have to go back into the harsh reality of going back to the 8 to 5 and being in corporate America. Well, we gave ourselves a 3-year window by which to, turn this dream into a reality. And lo and behold, my timing was right, because this is when Dodge came out with a program in the NASCAR Truck Series where, unlike most programs, you didn't have to bring a checkbook. All you had to do is bring your helmet. And this was basically a nationwide, gong show, I like to call it, or search for a qualified minority driver to race in the NASCAR Craftsman Truck Series. So that basically was my springboard to being able to tell, the high-tech job, see you later, sayonara. And my ship came in, and I started out at, 4 years of age as a rookie in NASCAR. So people said, look, tell that story. You got to tell that story more often. And that's what caused me to write a book called Winning in Reverse. Now, it's not my autobiography. I'm not that important, but I think the lessons that I learned and that I, expound upon people are things that anybody, no matter what your walk of life is, no matter what your passion is, these are keys to help you become successful in what it is you want to do. Like I said, identify 8 of them. One of them is to identify what your passion is. Another is like getting out of your comfort zone. Another is, like I was just mentioning, the power of networking. Another is gratitude, and being thankful for the things that have happened to you and taking the time to enjoy what you've accomplished. Obviously perseverance and persistence and determination are all very key. But anyway, I wrote this motivational memoir. It's been very well received. It's like 5-star on Amazon. And it's allowed me to get into the speaking circuit. So I'm a motivational speaker, and I get the opportunity to, empower people and enthuse people and get people to get out of their comfort zone and do what it is with their life that they want to do. So that was a very long-winded answer to a very short.
Hey, what's going on, Vibe listeners? Carl here to talk to you guys for a minute about our partners over at Home Field Apparel. As we know, the racing season is already underway. We've already had 2 great action-packed weeks of racing, and there's no better time to start looking at new merchandise for the season than now. And that is where our friends at Home Field Apparel come into play. If you didn't already know who they are, they're a storied collegiate apparel company based out of Indianapolis, the heart of racing in North America, and they've been offering licensed apparel for a whopping 180 schools for a while now. And these are fantastic vintage designs made to fit comfortably as well. They're not going to wear out after a couple of wears. And I gotta tell you, it's got me really excited for the racing collection lineup they're releasing this year. And to start it off, they're taking the green flag with the Hendrick Motorsports collection, which is now live for pre-order on their website at homefieldapparel.com. And let me tell you something, they got a little something for everybody. Gear that pays homage to multiple eras of Hendrick Motorsports, one of the most winning teams in NASCAR history, featuring the likes of Jeff Gordon, Jimmy Johnson, old 7-time, and Tim Richmond, Mr. Days of Thunder himself. And I'm going to tell you guys something. I went on the website, I looked at the upcoming Hendrick merch drop, and I'm going to tell you something. This really highlights what Home Field excels at. These shirts are original artwork. There aren't recreations. It's nothing that they went and found on a search engine and grabbed and reprinted. They have worked closely and meticulously with Hendrick Motorsports, scouring over the archives of footage and photos to accurately recreate these wonderful vintage looks and really encapsulate the era of some of NASCAR's golden years spanning from the late 80s to the 2000s. These shirts are sure to turn heads and have folks asking, hey, did you find that at a yard sale or something? So imagine their shock when you tell them that these shirts were made in 2024, and they can also get one just like it online at homefieldapparel.com. It's a sleek, really easy to use website that allows you to view not only the current and upcoming racing collections, but all their offerings as well. They even have a mobile app you can also order from. So head on over to their website, homefieldapparel.com, and be sure to use our code VLV24. The Hendrick collection is live right now for pre-order. You can go over there, you can look at everything, see what you want, and hey, by the way, when you get it, tag us on Twitter. Let us know what you got at VL Vibes Podcast. It's time to let your racing apparel not just say that you're a racing fan, but let it shout it. Again, that's code VLV24 for 15% off at homefieldapparel.com.
It's awesome. The people need to hear that the impact that you still have on the motorsports world. So that was a really great answer to a really seemingly easy question, but we definitely appreciate that.
No problem. You ran out of time yet?
No.
Oh, no, you ain't done yet. Garth, what you got?
Oh man, I got too much. So something I do on the show is I joke around a lot. I do a lot of humor and bits. I do have to ask you before we get into any kind of serious conversation. With you being a UC Berkeley grad, did you watch Oppenheimer this past summer when it came out?
I actually just watched it recently. Now that it's streaming, I didn't go to the theater, but yeah,
okay.
On Netflix or whatever it was on.
Yeah, the way my mind works sometimes is like I'll see something, and if it has an NASCAR connection, I'm like, oh yeah. And so when I went to go see it, the person I saw it with, I was like, Bill Lester, who out of context, she was like, who is that? Also went to UC Berkeley, and I was like, crazy how stuff works out. And she's like, what? And I was like, I don't know. And so anyway, when this opportunity came, and after I listened to your Dinners with Racers interview, I was like, I need to ask him just out of curiosity if you saw that. But anyway, I had a lot of questions for you, but one thing I really wanted to ask: did you have a good time this weekend? It seemed like, or this past weekend, because it seemed like after all these years, you finally kind of got to have a bit of a homecoming Atlanta with like the history that happened there. I don't know, it's been over 18 years ago now.
Yeah,
yeah. I mean, my first question: did you have a good time this weekend? Because it looks like, you were really, really enjoying it, man.
Yeah, I did have a good time because I very frequently go to the racetrack. It's almost like for a former race car driver, going to the track is kind of like twisting the knife, right? Because you still, no matter if you have it or not, you still feel like you do have it. You could be out there, you could be enjoying it. You remember what it was like to be behind the wheel in competition and the adrenaline and all that kind of stuff. So I usually don't go personally. I usually watch it on TV. I am a fan of motorsports and racing. So I watch, my wife will tell you an absurd amount of racing on TV. So usually I'm watching it from the comfort of my home. But
Right.
let me tell you what I enjoyed the most about it. What I enjoyed the most about it was that when I was on the scene, I didn't hardly see anybody that looked like us out there.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I called, the fans closet NASCAR fans, because until, somebody who looks like us shows up on the scene, we typically don't go out there because we don't feel, comfortable out there. We don't feel like we are wanted out there. I mean, I can tell you when I went to like my first real NASCAR race in person, it was at Talladega in 1990. I went there for the sole purpose of meeting a brother who was highly positioned with Sears and the Die Hard brand. And I think it was the Sears Die Hard 500 at Talladega, or whatever it was at the time. And I remember going from the car in the parking lot, walking up the grandstands, and first off, it's already 90 or so degrees with, humidity that's off the chain. And I felt it like it must have been 130 degrees out there, because everybody stopped talking. Fingers started pointing as I was ascending the grandstands to head up to the suites to meet this guy. And I was like, holy cow. It was like I was an anomaly in the grandstand. So that was my very first indoctrination to NASCAR. I had seen it when I was younger on ABC's Wide World of Sports. And, it wasn't very interesting to me from the standpoint of all the Confederate flags that were being, waving in the breeze and all that kind of stuff. And a bunch of guys that didn't look like me or sound like me with Southern drawls. And, again, I come from a road racing background where I thought racing cars meant turning right, turning left, upshift, downshift, braking and all that kind of stuff, not dropping into fourth gear and turning left. So, I didn't really understand NASCAR and its infatuation. And, at that point, there were no safer walls or, Hans devices or anything like that. So, these guys were hitting the concrete walls at 100 some odd miles an hour and, lucky to be able to crawl out of the car. So I just did not understand what NASCAR was about. So needless to say, fast forward the clock a long way. And, here I am trying to get involved in NASCAR. But when I did get involved in NASCAR, there were not a lot that looked like me. But what I did see was a kind of like a changing in the hue, because when I was on the scene for a little bit of time, I saw a whole lot more folks coming out and supporting me. And when I made my Cup debut in 2006 at Atlanta Motor Speedway, I saw a bunch of us, and I couldn't believe the outpouring support, especially like through, media channels of Black folks that were just so proud of me and happy that I was out there and all that sort of stuff. And so it was cool, but it was nothing like what I experienced this past weekend at this race at AMS, because I saw us almost in droves. I mean, I'm telling you that when I was on the scene, I had to look long and hard to find anybody Black who was on a pit crew, let alone Black team owners like Jordan or, a driver like Bubba, and just all of the fans that were out there and having a good time and, being accepted from everything that I saw. And, NASCAR even has a program where they've got, I would say maybe it's called like the NASCAR, I don't know, SZN or whatever. I don't even know what the name of it is, but it was the first time I experienced it. And the only reason I experienced it is because a guy who I know there is a former crew member. He does a lot of community outreach stuff. And so he was dragging me around, and I was talking to boys and, kids from Boys and Girls Club, and that was fun. And, I was also interacting with the folks from the Black NASCAR fans group on Facebook, and, took pictures with them and interacted with them. And that was a lot of fun. But just all of the folks that I saw out there was just so overwhelming to me. It was just, it was inspiring. It was a source of pride, because I know that I was part of the catalyst for change, so, and of course it was always good to see Bubba. Bubba and I have gone, go back a long way. And so we had a chance to see each other right before he put his helmet on, and, wished him luck and all that kind of stuff. But, we were in fairly constant communication with each other. We text back and forth. I don't really get on the phone and holler at him because, I already know what the life of a Cup driver is, and you don't have much free time. So I don't bother him, but, I will encourage him, tell him things that I've seen that, I try to encourage him to continue to do, and things that, he might want to think differently about, or whatever the case is. so I enjoy that relationship I have with him. I think he's doing a wonderful job behind the wheel and moving the ball forward in the sport. I think that him being in the sport now has been extremely timely with the whole Black Lives Matter movement having been, taking place effectively at its zenith right when he was on the scene. That was a huge platform for him. And, it was through his efforts that the Confederate flag was banned. So that was something I would never have thought I would have seen in my lifetime. So to see that and for him to do what he's doing has been tremendous. But, needless to say, we all know about the emotional, toll that's been taken on him. And I've been, trying to encourage him to, hey, man, take a breath. Don't worry about the haters and all that kind of stuff. He knows that. But I think it probably means a little bit more coming from somebody like me who's done it. I've been in his shoes. So I think it carries a little bit more weight. But in any event, no, I enjoy being out there. That's not going to be something that I'm going to continue to do. I still give back to the sport by being on the NASCAR appeals panel. And, a lot of people were like tripping off the fact that I was part of the appeals panel where, Hendrick was called for that part, that, that whole scenario. Yeah. And I was part of that panel during that period of time. And people were joking around talking about, he's going to have a job with Hendrick now that he did, no. Yeah. People listen, people don't realize what went on behind the scenes. There were a lot of gray areas and it wasn't as cut and dry as people thought it was. People were like, how can they be let off the hook? The rules are the rules, the blah, 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 blah. Well, if NASCAR doesn't communicate some of these things effectively, then the rules aren't quite the rules. And the efforts that Hendricks made to make sure that they were within the rules did not get timely responses. So I'm going to say that and leave it alone because I don't want any of this to, go sideways. Media. Right. But to say it was good to be there.
Yeah, I remember you talk about the Facebook group, and I'm in there with you, and I think we all are actually. And I remember when that verdict came down and people were grilling you about it, and I'm just like, the panel is more than just Bill Lesser, and they obviously reached that decision, as a whole. Like I said, and I felt really bad about it for it. I was like, man, this guy's like nice enough to talk to us all the time, and here they are, like, how could you do, X, Y, and Z. So, that's really great to hear, though. I'm so glad, because for so long, like every time we go to Atlanta, especially like what I call like post Bubba, which Bubba's been in the Cup Series for 6 years now, but post 2020, I really felt like they really had a lot of chances to bring that up, and they kind of flirted with it a bit, because I think NASCAR is still in a space where they're really kind of afraid a little bit of fan backlash to fully embrace and have those conversations and just say, like, look, this is who we are now. So they kind of skirt around it. This year they dove in feet first. A great friend of ours, Phil, was at the race this week, and he sent us some pictures of the trailer that you're on, talking about the history and stuff like that, and just kind of marveling all that stuff. And it was really cool to see. So, I'm so glad. It's so great to hear you had a good time this weekend, and you were there and got to enjoy that and got to take all that in a celebration and stuff like that.
Yeah, man, I appreciate it. I was really floored when they had that NASCAR like heritage trailer that you were
yes, it was. Yeah.
And I'm on the outside of it. I'm also featured on the inside of it and what have you. And that's something I didn't even know existed, so that kind of blew me away. I was like, like NASCAR fans posted a picture of it. I was like, what trailer are you talking about? So it was good to see that for myself and what have you. But, NASCAR has been making strides. But again, they have to be very careful. They don't want, backlash and, that sort of thing. And there are a lot of fans now that are talking about, well, people of color are now getting too many opportunities. I'm like, really? Are you serious?
Oh, yeah.
Why don't we just level the playing field and stop with the okie doke, But listen, they feel threatened and, they're going to sit there and lash out. We already know that this country is so divided that, those that are, let's say, very, very extreme, they're not afraid to say how they feel. Let's put it like that, So they stick their chests out and they typically say stuff without any fear of repercussion or anything like that. I wish we had the same level of freedom. We don't. Yeah. We always have to kind of have some, checks and balances to some degree. And typically, a lot of those folks that I'm talking about are just going half-cocked, off the rails, off the hinges, and there's no ramifications for it. But anyway, I hope things will continue to change. I see the landscape of the sport changing, and I'm happy that that's the case.
Yeah, definitely.
Danny, I know that your background is from Bill's primary background. I know you probably have some questions about his road racing career. What you got?
Absolutely, I do. I've been licking my chops the whole time, practically. But yes, it was so funny. You mentioned talking about Can-Am and stuff. I run our second show, which primarily focuses on these days it's mostly sports car racing. We make forays in the open wheel, but those are becoming increasingly sparing. But the big thing is you won at VIR in 2011. Which makes you were the first African American to do so in the Rolex sports car series. And I think Jordan Taylor, if I remember correctly, was your number 2 in that. But just talk a little bit about certainly kind of, I guess, both halves, if you will, of your sports car career, pre-NASCAR and then post.
Yeah, sure. Like, I said, I when I was in NASCAR, I consider myself a converted sports car road racer because my real love is road racing sports cars. It wasn't running around in a circle in a big old heavy pig with, 900 horsepower and a 10-inch wide tire. I like the horsepower, but I liked a whole lot more, downforce, a lot more braking, the ability to turn right as well as left. And so the NASCAR thing, I just never thought in a million years I'd wind up doing. But lo and behold, believe it or not, that's where I really made a name for myself, was in NASCAR. But, because even in sports cars and road racing, you can be like a 6-time champion like Scott Pruitt. And, very few people even know who Scott Pruitt is, which is a shame because Scott Pruitt was tremendous behind the wheel. I've watched it firsthand because, I've done 10 Rolex 24s at Daytona and, he was racing for Chip Ganassi and they were the powerhouse. And I was typically with these independent teams that we were like, on a shoestring budget and arm and a leg and what have you, just hoping to survive the night and what have you. So anyway, getting back to it. Yeah. When Jordan Taylor and I won at VIR in 2011, that was really the culmination of a lot of, what I consider just paying dues and sacrificing and doing everything to hopefully get that checkered flag. Now, I've done it in amateur racing a whole bunch of times, but the difference between amateur and pro is huge. Everything has to just line up your way, for you to be able to get that brass ring and cross that finish line first. And we were able to do it. I was the leadoff during that race, and it rained like monsoon at VIR that day. And so I was leadoff, and I turned it over in like second, and Jordan took it to the checkered in first, and became the first African American to win in the Rolex Grand Am Series, which is now IMSA. So that was really something I'll always cherish. I feel like it's almost like I remember it like it was yesterday. As a matter of fact, Jordan posted a lightning lap in the Garage 56 Camaro recently. And he talked about behind the scenes of that whole run. And he talked about his first win with me at VIR. So it even means a lot to him because that was his first professional racing victory. And it turned out to be that was my very first one as well. So, it means a lot to me. I love sports car road racing. Anytime it's on, if IMSA or even over in Europe with WEC and the 24 Hours of Le Mans. I'm all about that. Like I said, I'm a fan of racing. We can even start talking about Formula One, even though you said it's kind of like on the downswing for you, it's ramping down or whatever. But, this move that Lewis Hamilton just made to go to Ferrari, who saw that coming? It was as bold a move as what he did when he left McLaren to go to Mercedes, and everybody thought he was crazy, and look how well that paid off. So needless to say, Lewis doesn't do dumb stuff. He knows something that we don't know, and I expect big things from Ferrari. But all right, anyway, I'm sidetracking, man. We can go on for hours.
I'll go next. Yeah, I was gonna say I'll go next. So we touched earlier on, and Carl mentioned you being in Atlanta, and I'm glad that I'm a big proponent that people should be able to get their flowers while they can still smell them, and so I'm glad that you had that opportunity to have that great experience. But one of the things that, for context, when we first started this show, we all came together from a group chat full of Black NASCAR fans, and we made the show. We designed the intro, and we wanted to have significant moments in motorsports history involving African Americans. So we've got audio from Wendell Scott, we've got audio from Lewis Hamilton, we've got audio from Bubba. But one of the clips that we have is the audio over your qualifying attempt at Atlanta Motor Speedway from March 2006 when you qualified. So I just wondered if you could briefly just touch on that day. What are your memories of that? Is there anything around that weekend that stood out to you? Obviously, it was a huge achievement for your career and help, as you said, pushing the ball forward. I remember being a kid reading the newspaper article that morning and clipping out the Sunday paper article that had your picture in it because there was a black man in the Cup Series, racing with the Jeff Gordons, the Jimmy Johnsons, my idols and heroes growing up. So, for me, it was a very impactful moment, but I'm just curious, what are your memories that you have from that experience?
Well, let's put it like this. People oftentimes ask me, what do I feel is my most significant accomplishment? And I can say, without hesitation, was qualifying for my first Cup race. And I didn't say racing in my first Cup race, but qualifying for my first Cup race, because back then in 2006, there were 50 plus cars trying to make a 43 car Cup Series field. Right now, there's a full field of 40 and only like 36 to 38 show up. So, as long as you have a car that's Cup qualified or, that you can afford to field, you can make it into a Cup Series race now. Then you had go or go homers. And I was a go or go homer, which meant that if I didn't qualify, I went home. And so the pressure was immense for me to make it in that night. This was a Friday night before the race on Sunday, which wound up being Monday because it was rained out on Sunday. But the media attention was tremendous. I mean, seems like media outlet or channel or whatever was seeking, an interview with me or wanted some of my time and whatever that case is, because it was such a big deal from a media standpoint. From my standpoint, I just wanted to prove that I deserve to be there, that everything that I had done throughout my racing career was worth it. That, this was the culmination, as far as I was concerned, of everything I was telling you about before, as far as sacrifice and everything else, and determination, and, missing out on events and all that kind of stuff that is required or was required for me to get to the top level of the sport. So that night, was big for me. It was really an apprehensive scenario because during practice earlier in the day, the car was not that good. It wasn't doing what I wanted it to do. I was asking it to do certain things. It wasn't doing it. But my crew chief, Ricky Vyers, he just, internalized what I was saying and, I think had quiet confidence, because I think he believed all along that I was going to be able to do it. And mind you, my reputation in NASCAR during that time was not the greatest racer, but a phenomenal qualifier. In other words, I've had pole positions in the truck series and stuff, and I've beaten out guys with far, more experience, and known to be extremely fast. And, I've done that sort of thing. And so there was a lot of, I guess, expectation or, hope that I was going to be able to put this car on my back and make the field. But, it was really difficult trying to get Waste Management to commit to the program, because they already had a car in the field. They had Sterling Marlin already with Waste Management colors in there. And it took the efforts of a guy named Carlton Yearwood, who was head of corporate relations and diversity for Waste Management, to demonstrate what the significance of my possibly being in this race would mean to their company. And he went out on a limb. I mean, he stretched his neck to make sure that Waste Management was going to get behind me for this program. And so, of course, I had that pressure. I had the pressure of, all the media. And I had anxiety because my car wasn't quite right. But anyway, that Friday night, I just, dug deep. I told myself I wasn't going to leave anything out there. I was either going to qualify this thing in the show, or I was going to fail miserably. And I don't know what failing miserably was going to mean, but it definitely wasn't going to mean that I was going to, get scared or, not have any kind of confidence, because I've always had confidence in my ability, and so everything worked out. what I asked the car to do during those 2 laps, it did. And one of the most, I think, hilarious parts about the whole thing was when, Larry McReynolds and Darrell Waltrip wrote me off on my qualifying laps because I didn't do my laps as conventionally as most Cup drivers did. I did it the way kind of like a sports car road racer would do it, which is, at that point, just get out early and then just get back to it hard, as opposed to drive it all the way down to the center. And it stuck. It worked. I made it. A whole bunch of cars went home and, made my Cup debut. And, the outpouring of support afterwards from, the Black community particularly was really overwhelming. And, no matter what happened in my career from there on out, they couldn't take that away from me.
Yeah, there's a particular reason. So I put together our intro when we first started doing the show. And, I sat down over the course of a couple weeks. We did our first one and I put it together and I was like, okay, it's pretty good. And then, but leading up to it, I was trying to figure out like, how do I encapsulate like our history in the Cup Series? Because we mainly talk about NASCAR. Danny has the second show we have where we talk about other things, but the audio clip that I included was Mike Joy discussing how you were, I think, only the 5th driver at that point in time in 2006 to start a Cup race, an African-American driver start a Cup race. And the end of that clip where Larry McReynolds and Darrell Waltrip are just so surprised that you making the field, I put in there. And I did that very intentionally. Nobody ever picked up on it. I never mentioned it. But I did that intentionally because our story in this sport has been one of constantly proving like we belong here. We can do this. We are as adequately equipped as anybody else is. And so I'm so glad you touched on that, because I also wanted to personally thank you, because when I sat down to make this whole thing, I could not find video of the 06 qualifying from Atlanta anywhere, but Mr. Bill Lester had that clip up on his YouTube channel and I was able to pull directly from that. So thank you for that.
No, absolutely. I mean, that was definitely not going to be something that went away, in the annals of history to be forgotten. Right. That was going to be something that, for here to, posterity, whatever, eternity, somebody would be able to take a look at it.
100%. So the other question I have for you, we can talk about your career all day and your racing deal all day. I've been in the room with Bill Davis a couple times. I've always wanted to ask him about you, but never got a chance to, just for a variety of reasons, because my brother's business is based in trucking in Arkansas. We're in Arkansas. And so I've been around Bill Davis and all that kind of stuff, but I did want to ask you, so this isn't just for me, but this is for all of NASCAR Twitter, because about twice a year, the last couple of years, everybody discovers in the Bill Davis days, you had some fantastic paint schemes. I've got some sitting next to my other monitor here lined up. And I wanted to ask you, and I can bring them up here and show them to you. These are a few that I had some questions about. And I don't know if you will, let's see if I can bring it up here real quick. Yeah, here we go. I wanted to ask you what brought about some of these partnerships and some of these schemes, because I mean, I know that your main partners at the time were Rallies, Checkers, which I did include those, Waste Management, but some of these we're talking about Old Spice, Tamales Combos, a Mars Company, Levi Strauss, U.S. Army, Crown Royal, Allstate, you wouldn't think about those being truck series brands necessarily, especially at the time when NASCAR's at its peak. And so everybody's always so curious, how did Bill Davis Racing and Bill Lester pull this off? What brought this about? And so since we're talking to you, I figured, hey, let's get down to the bottom of it if you could shed any light on it.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I wish, that they were much more significant partners of mine.
Yeah.
Typically they were one and done, or, and it wasn't any fault of mine or performance or anything like that. Mm. It was really a matter of, at the time, NASCAR was making a commitment to diversity, and my paint schemes and these partnerships were as a result of sponsors that were partners of NASCAR having to break off a little bit of their spend to put behind my program. So I was the beneficiary of some of NASCAR's very early diversity initiatives. And the reason that I benefited so much from these relationships is because of my relationship with Jim France. Jim has been a huge supporter of mine in NASCAR. Without the support that he provided me, I would have never lasted as long as I did. I would have probably been gone right after the Dodge program ended in 03. And then maybe I would have gone maybe a year with Toyota, but there were a lot of Toyota paint schemes that I ran that were just plain, just a white truck. There was no partnership on it. But what NASCAR offered these companies that were official partners of NASCAR was basically a little side conversation that said, you know what, as being an official partner, you're going to help with supporting this program that we have, this diversity program, which was all as a result of Jim wanting me to do well in the sport. He wanted to, give me an opportunity to be out there. And so I owe him, a huge, a lot of debt of gratitude. And I mentioned him, in my book, in my memoir, about just how important, he's been in my career, because it would have lasted a whole lot shorter period of time had he not been behind me. So that's what that was about. A lot of these sponsorships I didn't even know about until I was in the shop, and I'm like, well, okay, why is that on the truck? And they said, well, they've come up to help you. And I'm like, really? But, it would typically be in graphics only. There was no like product support. I didn't see any Levi's. I didn't see any combos. The one that I tell you I'm most proud about in terms of a relationship that I had, though, is Crown Royal. And, I hope I'm not offending anybody, but that was a good relationship.
I was just about to ask, actually.
Dude, man. I was giving Crown Royal to friends, as gifts, because I had so much of it that I didn't know what to do with it all. But anyway, no, I really enjoyed that partnership with Crown. But number one partner that I had was Waste Management throughout that whole truck program after Dodge. But followed closely probably by Crown Royal. They did a lot, and Checkers rallies did a lot as well. But the combos was one and done. The Office Depot was pretty much one and done, and so on. So what it did afford me was a whole bunch of fire suits, man. I probably got still like 60 fire suits. So it's
did you get to keep those?
Oh, absolutely, man.
Fantastic.
That's part of my legacy. I got my helmets, I got my fire suits, that sort of stuff.
That's awesome. Yeah.
So I'll go next. Just real quick. So you just mentioned the word legacy, which was going to lead to my next question. I think it's interesting from our perspective, because we're fans and we've seen the sport grow from the fan side of the fence, but you've been on the opposite side, in the garage, in the shop, on track. And I'm just curious, what do you think about the interest, not the interest, but I guess the influence on racing that you've had throughout your career? And then I guess part two of that is, how do you feel, NASCAR in particular has progressed in terms of diversity since your time as an active driver? They're doing, the stuff with the hauler. They've got a diversity program that's had several drivers. So I guess what's your thought, one, on your legacy on racing, and then, how do you think the sport of NASCAR has improved in that area?
Well, I guess, the best way for me to answer that is, when I went to the track this past weekend, I had so many folks that didn't have any reason to come up and speak to me and say, wow, it is great to see you. And, what are you doing? How you doing? You haven't changed a bit, all this kind of stuff. I mean, they're blowing sunshine up my rear if they're saying that, because I have changed. But in any event, no, I mean, that indicates to me that I had an impact on the sport, because you never know, it's not as if I won that many races, especially not in the NASCAR series. I won in the Rolex Grand Am, but in the trucks, I've led races, I've had pole positions, stuff like that, but I've never able to get the brass ring. So, and obviously no championships as a result. But I think people respect the hustle, the struggle, everything that I had to overcome. And, the things that I did as far as, never speaking ill about NASCAR and, never, going sideways about anybody or anything that really took place. Now, of course, I would express my opinion about stuff, but I did it in a, very professional, very diplomatic way. I didn't go out there and show my rear at any point in time. I think I carried myself well. I think the fans appreciate that. And one of the things I think that is most gratifying to me is when, I've been hanging out with, not hanging out, I was introduced to, as well as seeing a number of the crew guys that are in the sport now and how they go, man, you don't realize how big you are or you were as far as the influence that you had on me and, why I might have wanted to consider getting involved in this sport, as a crew member or over the wall or whatever the case might be. And, that is really uplifting to me to know that I had an impact, that I made an impression on these guys. And now when I look at the landscape, man, I mean, it's just, I'm beaming with pride because it is so different than when I was on the scene. I can only imagine what it was like for Willie T when he showed up for a handful of races. And then before that, Wendell Scott and what he was dealing with on a, weekday, week in, week out basis. I can't even fathom it. It's just a whole different deal, because there was no such thing as diversity or acceptance or anything of that nature. And we have still a very long way to go. But when I saw what I saw this past weekend, it meant a lot to me. So I know that I have, a place in the history of the sport. And, at this point, my legacy right now is really just trying to help others that want to become involved in the sport, whether it's NASCAR, whether it's, road racing, whether it, sports cars or open wheel. I mentor a whole lot of young brothers and sisters that are out there trying to be a part of this sport because they love it. They want to be involved in it, but they don't know how. How do I get involved? What are the things that I need to do? Do I need to get involved in this series? Should I consider that, that? And I'll try to give them some direction in terms of, hey, this is what I would recommend you do. First off, where do you want to go? Where do you see yourself in the future? What series do you see yourself racing in? And then I'll sometimes say, well, why are you goofing around in this series? And well, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, well, this is how you might want to course correct that so you can get to really where you want to go, instead of maybe being sidetracked. Because, you only, especially now, these drivers are getting younger and younger and they don't have time. I mean, I broke the mold when I showed up on the professional scene at 40 years of age. That's not going to ever happen again, So, I'm trying to give these, these young folks as much direction as I can and support them as much as I can because it's, relieving to me to see that so many of us want to be involved. I just wish the playing field was more level. That's the thing that I just hate about it. It is a money-driven sport. It is not a stick and ball sport where you show up with your talent. Here, you show up with your checkbook first, typically, and your helmet second. And that's just not even right. And people say, okay, well, why aren't there more of us in the sport? And I say it's because of two things: exposure and opportunity. You have to be exposed at it at a very young age. You got to find out if this is something that you love at a young age. And if you're exposed to it, then you have to have the opportunity to participate. And that requires funding. That requires dollars. You just don't, it's almost like telling LeBron James, okay, LeBron, you got handles, you can jump out of the gym. You can see behind your, you got eyes in the back of your head. So, okay, so now bring, X millions of dollars and you can play basketball. That's how it is nowadays. And, I call these drivers, these youngsters out there now, trust fund kids, because the common denominator amongst just about all of them is that there's money in the family. Yep. And how many, Black families can afford to put a kid in their single digit years at their go-kart level, their impressionable years, on a national karting championship to the tune of six figures, because that's what it costs now. You can easily spend over $100,000 for a kid 5, 6, 8 years old to race nationally trying to get a karting championship per year. I mean, there are a whole lot of them that can afford to do it. It's, pennies falling out of their pockets. But for us, it's an insane amount of money typically. And what if you all of a sudden decide, at 14 as a teenager or something like that, you know what? I don't want to race anymore. I want to do something else. I'm interested in this or that or the other. How many families that have basically sacrificed everything, private schooling, everything that's required for them to chase a national championship at a young age, can afford to just say, okay, well, we spent, $500,000 or whatever the case is. Okay, no big deal. not a whole lot of families. So it's a very, very, very difficult scenario, especially when you consider when you're at the top rung of the ladder and you're at the Cup Series, you are one of 40, or at the case may be now, one of 36, 38. But effectively, you are one of 40. You are not one of the, 600 football players, 300 football players, or 400 or 500, whatever, Major League Baseball players, whatever. You are one of 40. That's it. The opportunities are few and far in between. So, it's disappointing from that perspective, but, I didn't make the rules, but I just try to make it as clear to people as possible what it is you're trying to achieve when you set yourself down this path.
Yeah, I mean, that's why I didn't mean to jump in front of anybody, but when people talk about, like Rajah Cruz's path to the Truck Series, or like Bubba Wallace's like path to 2311, right? People want to fall back on like so bad the excuse of, or they talk about like Rev Racing and like people like Nick Sanchez and LeVar Scott and stuff like that. People want to fall back so quickly on like how it's discriminatory that there's an organization or interest or DEI initiatives that are giving these people money to race. But it's like, well, I mean, you're talking about a sport that isn't within our reach as far as geographically, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, and so like that's the number one thing is like we are not in the same rooms with the people that are able to like help elevate you to the next series. You talked about being friends with Jim France, right? Like NASCAR doesn't operate in areas where people can, black people can just reach out and just make those kind of connections. And so that's why, just to drive home what you're saying, like that's why like those organizations are so important. That's why like moments like what Bubba Wallace had in 2020 are so important. Like one thing that will always stick out to me is a cornerstone of like what it's like to be Black in NASCAR specifically. And I try not to get off on these tangents on this pod because we don't want to be preachy. But one thing that will always stick to me when we have those discussions is like the end of 2014, right? We don't know what Bubba Wallace is doing the following season. KBM is like, hey, we don't really have him signed. JGR is like, we don't really have any plans for him. And Kyle Busch, who is one of the best to ever do it, is like, look, Bubba kid can drive. That's not even the question. The situation is nobody wants to pay for it, and so he's just in a free fall. So it's just like, just to sum up what you're saying, I mean, yeah, that is the unfortunate side of all this. And that's why I'm so glad now to see there being so many strides made in every avenue of the sport, from its fans and people like us to the people inside of the sport, the teams, to start having these conversations and hopefully broaden it to where maybe that road isn't as hard for, the next one coming up. Arthur talks all the time about the best driver we could ever possibly see is probably sitting on a couch somewhere because they don't know how to make it, into the sport. The best driver this series might ever see in the modern day could be a young Hispanic kid or a young, Black kid or something. And hopefully we're making the inroads now to where in 5 years or so, them making that next step to try to partner with people that are going to fund that way up, because you have to have money to make it, is a lot easier than what it's been for a long period of time. And your conversation about, just speaking to like how hard it was to get Waste Management to sign off on 2 Cup races, because I think you guys had 2, right? It was Atlanta and Dover. Am I right about that?
It was going to be a 3 race program with Atlanta, right, Michigan, and California Speedway.
Oh, that's right. Okay.
And I failed to qualify California because I pushed it so hard because
that's what it was.
It wasn't where it was supposed to be, and I overstepped it and spun it, so I didn't take a start in California. But it was a 3 race program, and you know what? They spent like 800,000 or 900,000. It was almost like 300,000 a race. And just from the race at Atlanta, the stats showed that they achieved like $26 million in measured media attention. So the return on investment was phenomenal. They even came back and said, you know what, I wish we weren't committed to Sterling Marlin because the amount of exposure you generate is phenomenal. But it was more close to that number, but it's crazy.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm sorry, I don't remember who I stepped over. I don't know.
You're good. Yeah. Danny, you got another question, Danny?
I do actually, just a quick one. So the funny thing is, a lot to talk about, what at least what I have perceived online about your cup starts. But, I actually got to know you through trucks. I was a very little kid at the time, it must be said. But same thing. I want to say it was thumbing through. It might have been Road and Track, and they might have done a brief thing on you. I mean, this would have been circa like 2000 or 2001, so details are a little fuzzy. I probably should have tried to go dig out that issue just to confirm, but it, and then one of the things it talks about is and this is something I didn't remember until just doing a quick search before we got started, but you and Mr. Norfleet racing at the same time. And I think that is absolutely wild. I didn't remember that was a thing. But to have, I think that's the only time that you have had two black drivers active in any series. If my stats are correct, I'm sure somebody will correct me, but that's wild. And I'm curious to know what the chatter at the time would have been like if there was any at all. Certainly, this is well before the commoditization of the internet, but still, I'd be interested to know what kind of word on the ground was.
So, that race was Portland. It was a road race at that time in the trucks. So that was in 2000. And it was the first time that I think, there were two black drivers at the same time in the same event. But don't hold me to that. But that's what I believe. It was historic from that perspective, if memory serves. But since then, there was a race where Willie, myself, and a guy named Tim Woods raced. I think it was South Boston. And that was like the first time that there have been three black drivers in a truck series. So, there's been some historic moments I've been a part of. But, that Portland race was really nothing to get excited about because I was in a truck that was set up to turn left on a road course that was primarily turning right. It was clockwise. So first time I went into turn one and stepped on the brakes and the thing damn near hooked into the wall. My eyes were as big as saucers. But no, I understand and appreciate the historical, perspective and significance of it all. I just think there's more to come. I see that there's more of us that are out there that are trying to get the opportunities, that are trying to be on that platform.
So yeah, Bill. Like I said, when we put this pod together and we started having like real conversations about getting to talk to drivers and stuff like that, immediately you were the first person to come to mind for me. And I just want to tell you, I know that you know this, but I want you to hear it. Like all of us, Daniela, myself, Arthur, Jarrett, have all been fans for over a decade, if not longer. I know me and Art are in the 20 plus year club. Me and Jared, I think, are as well. Dating back to, Winston Cup days. And Danielle's been there for a long time as well. I have lived, slept, and I've lived, eaten, slept racing since I was like a little kid. So, so I want, this podcast was born out of the conversation of, we need to show people that we've always been here. We've always been fans. We've always been as in depth and know what we're talking about. Just like the other groups of people who feel like we've only shown up because of Bubba or because of, wokeness or whatever the case may be, pandering, whatever you want it to be. And I want you to know that, seeing you make that cup race in 06 to me is always going to be a core memory. I watched the Daytona, 500 that Dale Earnhardt Sr. won like live. And I have more of a memory of you making the cup race than that because growing up in Arkansas for me and being a big Jeff Gordon kid and being told by everybody, not just white people, black people too, like, oh, NASCAR isn't a sport. You shouldn't like that sport. It's not for you. They don't want you there, X, Y, and Z. And so seeing you I know you maybe won't always define it as success, but seeing you perform at the levels you performed at as late in your career as you did and being around for as long as you did will always serve as vindication to me. And I think a lot of people that we made the right choice. We're not going to be scared away. We're not going to be told that it's not for us or gate kept away. It has always meant the world to me. This is certainly a highlight of mine, probably for the rest of the year to get to talk to you. But also, what that night in 06 started is where we're at now. And I want you to know that. I want you to know that it really put in the minds of a lot of people, and I'm sure you do, that this is that us being in the sport is not only possible but sustainable, and it's achievable, and we bring quality to racing in this country, and like anybody else does, and so I just from the bottom of my heart want to really say thank you, because I'm sure there were moments where you felt like, what am I doing? Is this really worth it? I can't imagine what was said to you and stuff like that, because I've heard some stories about what Bobby Hamilton racing was like, what BDR was like, stuff like that. So I can only imagine. But from the bottom of my heart, I really and truly want to say thank you for all that you've done for the sport from then to now. I don't think there's a driver out there that is accessible as you are. And I want you to understand that. Like I said, as far as all that stuff. So like I said, thank you for all that you've done. This has been really, really awesome. I would have never imagined a year ago that I would have gotten this opportunity, or any of us. So thank you for that so much. I really appreciate it. But that's all I had for this whole deal. So.
Wow, Carl. Listen, man, I appreciate it. I mean, I can tell just how heartfelt that was. And it means a lot to me because, like you said, you just never know if anybody's watching or if anybody cares. And, was it all worth it? And, all that kind of stuff. I could have led a very different life. People were saying, man, you are successful as a research and development project manager. And I'm like, no, I'm not successful because I'm not happy. I wanted to not live a life I coulda, woulda, shoulda. I had a passion to race cars, and I didn't want to look back on it and not take the chance, take the risk. I didn't want to live a life of regrets. And so, it worked out. It could have easily gone the other way. People said, look, why would you do this? You don't know if you're going to make it. You're making a 6-figure salary. You're managing a couple dozen, software development engineers. You are successful. And I'm like, no, I'm not happy. So I'm not successful. So, I did, as a result of what I, sacrificed and what I was able to accomplish, I feel lead a successful life. So I'm glad it all worked out. And for you to tell me what, what you just told me, it means a lot to me because I can tell, that's real love. And so Thank you, man. I appreciate you.
Hey, man, not a problem. Yeah, that's all I got. Jared, Art, Danielle, you guys got anything else?
I mean, you kind of can't go back and ask anything else after you just dropped the mic on us, Carl.
Yeah, really hard to follow that.
Yeah,
But we have some questions for off air. But as far as on air, if you're not already following Bill, at Bill_Lester on Twitter, make sure you guys grab a copy of his book, Winning in Reverse. We just want to thank you again for taking the time to meet with us and greet with us. And I know, like we said earlier in the show, all of us are on the Black NASCAR Facebook page, so they're going to be really excited that the Black NASCAR podcast got a chance to interview one of the greats. So we'll let you know when this releases, so we can all share that for the masses. But we appreciate you guys for listening, taking the time, and talk to y'all soon.
See you later.
See you.